Tonight, we're not just telling a story. We're stepping into a nightmare that became a legend. A story about a woman named Elena Morrison, left for dead in the heart of the unforgiving desert. But what happened after she was abandoned? That's where things get truly unbelievable. When the Comanche war chief found her, he wasn't just saving a life. He was setting in motion a chain of events so twisted, so drenched in betrayal and impossible choices, that it would change his entire nation forever. You think you know stories of survival? You don't know this one. Stick with me, because every single word you're about to hear is a step deeper into a story of revenge, justice, and a love so powerful it defied death itself. The news arrived like a death rattle on the wind. 3 riders galloping into the Comanche camp, as if the devil himself were chasing them. Their horses were slick with sweat, their faces grim. The whole camp went silent. Children stopped their games. Women paused their work. Everyone knew this kind of speed meant blood had been spilled. Elena was mending a child's moccasin with Ayana, the woman who had become her guide and friend in this strange new world. Her hands, once soft enough for piano keys, were now a geography of calluses and scratches. It had been 3 days since the warrior key had pulled her from the jaws of death, and every hour had been a lesson in survival. But nothing could have prepared her for this. Kay emerged from his father's lodge, moving with the lethal grace of a panther. He was a mountain of a man, his bronze skin stretched taut over muscle, his strange green eyes the color of river moss. Missing nothing. He met the riders, his posture radiating an authority that needed no words. The lead rider spoke in a low, urgent Comanche torrent. Elena couldn't understand the language, not yet, but she understood the tone. It was the sound of disaster. She watched Kay's face, a mask of stone, but she saw the muscles in his jaw clench. He listened, nodded once, and then his eyes, those impossible green eyes, swept across the camp and locked onto hers. A chill, cold and sharp as a blade, shot down her spine. It had nothing to do with the evening air. He walked towards her. Every step was deliberate, purposeful. The camp held its breath, watching. He stopped before her, his shadow falling over her like a sentence being passed. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kay's voice was tight, a bowstring pulled to its limit. "The wagon train? The one that abandoned you." He let the words hang in the air, heavy and dark. "They've been found." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Found? After all this time? A wild, complicated mix of emotions swirled inside her. Relief, anger, fear. "What do you mean, found?" "Apache raiders," he said, his eyes never leaving hers, as if searching for something deep inside her soul. "They hit the wagon train 2 days from here. It was a massacre." The world seemed to tilt. The faces from the wagon train flashed through her mind. Martha Holbrook, clutching her 2 small daughters, the elderly Mrs. Patterson, young Sarah Jenkins, and Thomas Garrett, the wagon master who had looked her in the eye and sentenced her to death. Are they all dead?" she breathed. "Most of the men fought. They died," Kay said, his voice devoid of emotion. "But some survived. Women, children. The Apache took them alive." He paused, letting the horror of that sink in. Being taken by the Apache was a fate worse than a quick death. "They're holding them in a camp to the south." The news struck her like a physical blow. Whatever hatred she harbored for them, the thought of them suffering at the hands of raiders filled her with a sickening dread. This was a horror she wouldn't wish on her worst enemy. "Among the survivors," Kay continued, his voice dropping lower, each word a stone hitting the ground, "is the wagon master, Thomas Garrett, the man who left you to die." And just like that, the world shifted again. Garrett, alive, a prisoner, a part of her, a dark, primal part, whispered that this was justice. This was karma. He had left her to the desert, and now the desert had delivered him to a different kind of hell. But another part of her, the part her father had raised, the part that valued life, recoiled in horror. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered, the question torn from her throat. "Because tomorrow the council will decide your fate. Kay replied, his gaze intense, pinning her in place. They will judge your worthiness to join our people. They will look into your spirit and see what you are made of. He took a step closer, and the air crackled with a tension that was more than just the news. And I am going to give you a choice that will show them exactly who you are. Ayana, who had been silent until now, rose to her feet, her face etched with alarm. Kay, she warned, what are you planning? Kay ignored her. His focus was entirely on Elena. I am going to ride to that Apache camp. I am going to rescue the survivors. The words were spoken so simply, so matter-of-factly, yet they carried the weight of a death sentence. Their war party is small, perhaps 20 warriors. With the right plan, it can be done. But it will be dangerous. Some of us will not return. Elena stared at him, her mind reeling. She couldn't process it. You would risk your life, risk your warriors, to save the people who left me for dead? Not for them, Kay said, and his voice softened, becoming a low, intense vibration that seemed to reach inside her chest. For you. This is for you, Elena. To see what choice you will make when you are given the power of life and death over those who wronged you. The implication crashed over her like a tidal wave. It wasn't a question, it was a test, a trial by fire. You want me to go with you? I want you to choose, he corrected, his voice sharp again. You have two paths. You can stay here, safe in this camp. You can let the Apache deliver the justice you surely crave. Let the man who abandoned you suffer the fate he earned. No one would blame you. In fact, many of my people would celebrate it. He paused, his green eyes burning into hers. Or you can ride with us. You can face the arrows and the knives. You can help save the very people who spit on your pleas for mercy. You can prove that your heart is bigger than your hate. Ayana gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Kay, you cannot. The council will never approve. Taking her into battle? An outsider? If she is harmed, they will hold you responsible. If she is harmed, then I will face the consequences. Kay snapped, his authority absolute. But his eyes, when they returned to Elena, held something else, something vulnerable. This is her true test, Ayana. Not the work she has done, not the words she will speak. This choice, this single choice will reveal her spirit. It will decide everything. Elena's world narrowed to the space between her and this impossible man. The faces of the wagon train swam before her eyes. Their scorn, their fear, the way they had refused to meet her gaze as they rode away, leaving her with a broken wagon and a death sentence. She owed them nothing, less than nothing. They deserved to be forgotten. They deserved whatever fate awaited them. But as she looked into Key's eyes, she understood. This wasn't about Garrett. This wasn't about the wagon train at all. This was about her. This was his way of asking a question he couldn't put into words. Was she a person defined by her wounds or by her strength? Did she belong to the world of vengeance and betrayal she had left behind? Or did she have the soul of a Comanche? Suddenly, a thought broke through the chaos in her mind. A piece of guilt she had been carrying for days. A small, nagging shame. The oxen, she said, her voice small. Kay looked confused. What oxen? The ones I left with my wagon, she said, the words tumbling out. They were lame. They were dying of thirst, and I just left them. I was so focused on myself, on surviving, that I didn't even think to unhitch them, to give them a chance. Her voice broke, the shame finally spilling over. They were innocent. They didn't deserve to suffer because of what happened to me. A flicker of something unreadable passed through Kay's eyes. It wasn't just approval. It was deeper. It was understanding. You carry guilt for animals that were not your fault, he said softly. This tells me more about your heart than anything else. Your regret honors the spirits of the plains, Ayana added gently, placing a comforting hand on Elena's arm. It tells me, Kay said, his voice low and certain, that your spirit is already Comanche, which is why I believe you will make the right choice. Elena looked around the camp. The flickering firelight, the smell of wood smoke, the soft murmur of a language she was beginning to understand. The children playing, the women singing softly as they worked. In 3 days, these savages had shown her more humanity than her own people had in 3 weeks. They had taken her in, fed her, clothed her, and asked for nothing in return. All they asked was that she prove her heart was strong, and now Kay was offering her the chance. A terrifying, insane, impossible chance to prove it to them and to herself. She looked back at him, the tall, powerful warrior who had saved her life and was now offering her a new one. "When do we leave?" she asked. A slow smile, the first she had ever seen from him, touched the corners of Kay's mouth, transforming his harsh features into something breathtaking. "Before dawn, we ride hard, we strike fast, and we are gone before the Apache know what hit them. How many warriors will ride with us?" 12 of our best, he answered, including Takakota and Chayton. Elena's eyebrows shot up. Takakota was a grim, scarred warrior who had made his distrust of her plain from the moment she arrived. He looked at her like she was a disease. Chayton was younger, but his eyes held the same suspicion. "Why would they volunteer for this? It's for me." "Because they are loyal to me," Kay said simply, "and because even they are beginning to see that you are not like the other whites. Your courage in the desert, your willingness to work, your respect for our ways." His gaze softened. "These things have been noticed." Ayana was already moving, her practical nature taking over. "You will need weapons," she said, her voice firm, "and proper clothes. A dress will not serve you in Apache territory." As Ayana helped her prepare, pulling buckskin leggings and a tunic from a storage chest, Elena's mind was a whirlwind. A week ago, she was a prim and proper lady from back east, on her way to a new life. Now she was preparing to ride into battle alongside Comanche warriors to save the very people who had left her to die in the dust. The irony was so thick she could taste it. "Are you afraid?" Ayana asked, her dark eyes searching Elena's face as she braided her long blonde hair into a tight, practical braid. "Terrified," Elena admitted. A strange, wild energy was fizzing through her veins, a mix of pure terror and a thrilling, electric excitement. "Does that make me crazy?" Ayana laughed, a warm, rich sound that seemed to push back the darkness. "It makes you Comanche," she said. "We believe true courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting in spite of it." Later that night, lying in the darkness of the teepee, Elena stared up at the smoke hole, a perfect circle of stars winking back at her. Tomorrow she would ride. Tomorrow she might die. But for the first time since her father's death, she felt completely, terrifyingly, and wonderfully alive. And as she drifted to sleep, her dreams were filled with the image of piercing green eyes and the promise of a future she could never have imagined. But outside her teepee, Kay stood watch in the darkness, a solitary figure against the vast, star-dusted plains. He had told his council, and he had told Elena, that this mission was a test of her character, a way for her to prove her worth. But he had lied. The mission was a test, yes, but not for her. It was for him. He was falling for the woman with hair like spun gold and a spirit of forged steel, and it terrified him. He was the son of the chief, a man who had to be stronger, colder, and smarter than everyone else. Love was a complication he could not afford. This insane, desperate raid was his own private test. He was throwing her into the fire to see if what he felt was real, to see if she would emerge from the flames as the woman of his visions, or if she would be consumed by them. And he didn't know which outcome scared him more. The blackness before dawn was absolute, a thick, velvet blanket that smothered all light and sound. Elena was pulled from a restless sleep by a gentle hand on her shoulder. She opened her eyes to see Ayana's silhouette crouched beside her. "It is time," Ayana whispered. "The men are with the horses." Instantly, Elena was awake, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Fear and adrenaline surged through her, a potent cocktail that made her hands tremble. Through the thin hide walls of the teepee, she could hear the quiet, efficient sounds of a war party preparing to ride. The soft snort of a horse, the creak of saddle leather, the low murmur of men's voices. This was real. This was happening. Iana helped her dress in the warrior's clothing. The buckskin felt strange and powerful against her skin, a second hide that promised freedom of movement. As Ayana braided her hair, weaving in leather strips to keep it secure, she looked at Elena with a new intensity. "You look like one of us now," she said. "But today you must think like one of us. The Apache are not our people. They are merciless. They will not hesitate to kill you because you are a woman. Do you understand?" Elena nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. Ayana strapped a leather belt around her waist, a heavy, bone-handled knife resting against her hip. The weight was both terrifying and reassuring. "Have you ever," Elena started, then hesitated. "Have you ever had to kill someone?" Ayana's gaze didn't waver. "Yes," she said simply. "When Buffalo soldiers attacked our camp 3 winters ago, I killed 2 of them to protect the children. It is not a thing to be enjoyed, but it is a thing that must sometimes be done." Her brutal honesty was a strange comfort. This wasn't about hate, it was about survival. They emerged into the pre-dawn chill. The rescue party was a group of shadows. 13 warriors already mounted, their faces painted in streaks of black and red for war. They were an intimidating sight, a silent promise of violence. At their head, astride a massive black stallion that seemed carved from midnight, was Kay. Elena's breath caught in her throat. He had painted his face in bold, jagged lines that accentuated the sharp planes of his cheekbones and the fierce set of his jaw. His green eyes seemed to glow in the darkness, like embers in a dying fire. His chest was bare, save for a necklace of massive bear claws. He was armed with a rifle, a bow, a war club, and a long, wicked-looking lance. He was not a man. He was the spirit of war itself. "You came," he said as she approached. His voice held a note of something she couldn't quite decipher. Surprise? Relief? "Did you think I wouldn't?" she replied, trying to keep her own voice steady. Takakota, the scarred warrior whose gaze was a constant accusation, led a small, nimble mare forward for her. He didn't look at her, merely grunted and handed her the reins. "I hoped you would," Kay said, his eyes locking with hers over the back of the mare. "But I know what I asked of you. These people, they deserve nothing from you. No one would have judged you if you had stayed." "Maybe not," Elena said, swinging herself into the saddle with a grace that surprised even her. "But I would have judged myself." Something shifted in Kay's expression, a warmth that went beyond mere approval. It was a look that promised things she didn't dare think about, not now. The sky to the east was just beginning to bleed a faint, bruised purple. It was time. The ride was like moving through a dream. The Comanche warriors flowed over the landscape like water, their horses making almost no sound. They didn't speak, communicating with a series of subtle hand signals that Elena couldn't follow. Their senses were on high alert. They seemed to feel the world around them rather than just see it. She found herself riding between Kay and Chayton, the young warrior who had been so suspicious of her. But as the miles wore on, she felt his attitude changing. He watched her, not with suspicion, but with a critical eye, noting how she handled her horse, how she navigated the treacherous terrain, how she endured the grueling pace without a single word of complaint. As the sun began to climb, casting long shadows across the red rock canyons, Kay raised a hand. The entire party froze, melting into the landscape. He dismounted and moved forward like a snake, vanishing over a ridge. He returned minutes later, his face a grim mask. "The camp is larger than my scouts reported," he said in a low voice that carried to all of them. "At least 30 warriors, not 20, and they're not celebrating. They're alert. They have sentries on the high ground." Takakota's scarred face tightened. "The odds are against us. We should turn back, gather more men." "There is no time," Kay countered, his voice sharp as flint. "The Apache do not keep prisoners for long. If we wait, we will be rescuing corpses." Elena urged her horse forward. "How many survivors did you see?" "7," Kay answered, his eyes on her. "5 women, 2 children. They're tied up in the center of the camp." Her heart clenched. It had to be Martha Holbrook and her daughters, along with the others, people who had condemned her to die, and now her life was tied to theirs once more. "Is Garrett there?" she asked, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. Kay's expression darkened. "The wagon master. Yes, he is there. But he's been staked out away from the others. He's been questioned." Elena didn't need him to elaborate. The images that flooded her mind were horrifying enough. Whatever Garrett had done, no one deserved that. "We need a diversion," Chayton said suddenly, his voice crisp and clear. He was looking straight at Kay, but Elena felt his words were directed at her. Something big, something to draw the main body of warriors away from the camp. "What do you suggest?" Kay asked. Chayton's dark eyes shifted, and for the first time he looked directly at Elena. And in his gaze she saw not suspicion, but a startling, cold calculation. Respect. "She could do it," he said. The other warriors murmured, turning to look at her. The Apache have heard tales of the white settlers, but they have never seen a woman with hair the color of the sun riding a Comanche war horse. Chayton continued, his voice gaining confidence. "If she were to appear on the ridge to the north of their camp, a lone woman, they would think it was a spirit or a prize sent from their gods. They would become reckless. They would send every warrior they have to capture her." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Bait. He wanted her to be bait. "It would be a death sentence," Takakota growled, his eyes flashing with anger. "If they catch her—" "They won't catch me," Elena said, her voice coming out stronger and clearer than she felt. The words surprised her. Where had that come from? She looked at the faces around her, at Kay's taut expression, at Chayton's challenging gaze, at Takakota's grudging disbelief. "I'm good at running away from dangerous men," she added, a bitter smile touching her lips. Takakota stared at her, his head tilted. "You would do this? You would risk a fate worse than death? For them?" "Yes," Elena said simply, "because it's the right thing to do." The old warrior held her gaze for a long moment, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Perhaps," he said, his voice a low rumble, "perhaps we have been wrong about you, white woman." The plan was laid with brutal efficiency. Elena would ride to the northern ridge. She would show herself, then lead the pursuing Apaches on a wild chase through the maze of canyons they had just traveled. She would use their recklessness and greed against them, keeping them occupied. While the main Apache force was distracted, Kay and half the warriors would hit the weakened camp from the south. Takakota and the remaining men would create a smaller secondary diversion from the east, adding to the chaos and confusion. It was a desperate, high-risk gamble. Everything depended on her. As she prepared to ride to her position, Kay caught her arm. His grip was gentle but firm. "Elena," he said, his voice low and urgent. His green eyes were filled with a raw, turbulent emotion she had never seen before. "If something goes wrong, if they capture you, know this. Your courage today will be sung by our people for generations." "Nothing is going to go wrong," she said, trying to project a confidence she was a million miles from feeling. Her heart was a wild bird trapped in her ribs. "I'll see you back at the rendezvous point." His hand lingered on her arm. "When this is over," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "there are things I must tell you. Things about why I was in the desert that day. About why I saved you." Before she could ask what he meant, he released her and melted back towards his men. She was left alone, her heart pounding not just from fear, but from the weight of his unspoken words. What hadn't he told her? Why had he really saved her? The ride to the northern ridge felt like a lifetime. Every rustle of the wind sounded like a lurking enemy. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. When she finally crested the hill and looked down into the valley, she saw them, the Apache camp, and in the center a small, pathetic huddle of captives. Even from this distance, she could see Martha's blue dress, could see the small shapes of her daughters clinging to her. Elena took a deep, shuddering breath. She said a silent prayer to a god she wasn't sure was listening anymore. Then she kicked her mare forward, riding out of the shadows and into the full, unforgiving light of the sun. The reaction from the camp below was instantaneous. A chorus of sharp, guttural shouts erupted. She saw warriors pointing, their excitement a palpable wave that rolled up the hillside. A lone white woman with hair like fire, appearing on a ridge like a phantom. It was more than they could have dreamed of. She waited, her heart in her throat, until she saw a large group, at least 15, maybe more, leap onto their ponies and begin to charge up the slope towards her. That was her cue. With a wild, high-pitched cry that she ripped from her own lungs, a cry that sounded surprisingly Comanche, She wheeled her horse around and galloped back towards the labyrinth of canyons. The chase was on. It was pure, undiluted terror, and it was the most exhilarating moment of her life. She had never ridden so fast, never pushed a horse so hard. The Apache war cries echoed behind her, a symphony of death that spurred her onward. The mare Takakota had given her was a miracle of speed and agility, responding to her slightest touch as they careened through the treacherous landscape. Arrows whistled past her head, so close she could hear them slice through the air. Once, a warrior on a faster horse drew terrifyingly close, and she caught a glimpse of his face, painted like a demonic skull, his eyes burning with a hateful fire. But she remembered the path. She remembered the lessons the Comanche women had taught her about reading the land. She led her pursuers through a narrow pass filled with loose shale, grinning with grim satisfaction as she heard the clatter of their horses slipping and sliding behind her. She took them around a blind turn that forced them to slow to a single file. She pushed them over rocky terrain that favored her lighter, more sure-footed mare. She was no longer prey. She was the conductor of this deadly orchestra. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely no more than half an hour, she reached the hidden valley they had designated as the rendezvous point. She practically fell from the saddle, her body screaming with exhaustion, and led the trembling mare into a cluster of rocks out of sight. Then she scrambled up a high ledge to watch, to wait. The silence was deafening. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. Had it worked? Had Kay and his men reached the camp? Were they safe? Or had she led her pursuers away only for her friends to be slaughtered? Had she failed? The sun climbed to its zenith, beating down on her mercilessly. The waiting was a special kind of torture. Every minute stretched into an hour. Her hope began to crumble, turning to dust in her mouth. Then she heard it, a sound that made her heart leap into her throat, the clear, sharp whistle of a hawk. But it wasn't a hawk. It was Kay's signal. The all clear. She scrambled down from her perch, slipping and sliding on the loose rock, and ran towards the sound, her legs unsteady. Kay appeared first, leading his black stallion, his rifle in his hand. His eyes scanned the valley, alert for any threat. When he saw her, the warrior's mask on his face dissolved into an expression of such profound relief that it stole her breath. He dropped the reins of his horse and strode towards her. Before she could even process what was happening, he had swept her up into his arms, crushing her against his hard chest in an embrace that was both fierce and desperate. "I thought I had lost you," he said, his voice a raw, ragged sound against her hair. "When we heard their war cries in the canyons, I thought—" "I'm fine," she managed to choke out, her face pressed against the warmth of his skin. Being held this close to him was making it impossible to think, to breathe. "Did it work? The captives, are they safe?" "See for yourself," he said, setting her gently back on her feet but keeping his hands firmly on her shoulders, as if afraid she might disappear. She turned. The rest of the war party was emerging from the mouth of the canyon, and with them was a group of 7 haggard, terrified figures, the survivors. Takakota was leading them, Martha Holbrook, her dress torn and filthy, her daughters clinging to her legs. The elderly Mrs. Patterson, Sarah Jenkins, all of them alive. But it was the last figure, slumped over a horse, that made Elena's blood run cold. Thomas Garrett. He was barely conscious, his clothes soaked in blood. His face was a swollen, bruised mess, a testament to the Apache's cruelty. When Martha Holbrook saw Elena, standing there alive, dressed as a Comanche warrior, her face went slack with utter shock. "Elena!" she gasped. "But how? We thought you were dead." "Yes," Elena said, her voice quiet but carrying in the stillness of the valley. "You left me to die." The words landed like stones. Martha had the decency to look away, her face flushing with a deep, burning shame. We had no choice," she stammered. "The wagon was broken. Garrett said—" "There's always a choice, Martha." Elena cut her off, her voice flat and cold. "You made yours. Today I made mine." She walked past her eyes fixed on the broken man swaying in his saddle. Thomas Garrett, the man who had condemned her. He looked down at her, his eyes clouded with fever and pain. "You!" he rasped, his voice a dry crackle. "The Morrison girl. How?" "The people you call savages saved my life," Elena said, her voice steady, meeting his gaze without flinching. "And now, they've just saved yours." Garrett's face, what she could see of it through the swelling and blood, seemed to crumple. And then she saw something she never ever expected to see from the hard, pragmatic wagon master. A tear tracked a clean path through the grime on his cheek. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words so faint they were almost lost on the wind. "God, forgive me. I'm so sorry. Your father, he was a good man. You deserve better." Elena looked at the pathetic shell of a man before her. The burning rage she had carried in her heart for weeks, the righteous anger that had fueled her, was suddenly gone. It evaporated under the harsh desert sun, leaving behind only a strange, hollow pity. "You're forgiven," she said, and the words were true. "My father taught me that hate only poisons the person who carries it." But as she turned away, a new, colder feeling began to settle in her stomach. Garrett's apology felt too easy, too quick. He had confessed to abandoning her, but his words about her father, "He was a good man," they felt wrong somehow. It was the way he said it, not with respect, but with a strange, hidden guilt. A shadow passed behind his eyes that had nothing to do with pain or fever. It was the shadow of a lie. She pushed the feeling down. It was probably nothing. Just her mind playing tricks on her after the ordeal. The journey back to the Comanche camp was slow and fraught with tension. The rescued captives were weak, their minds shattered by what they had endured. As they rode, Elena found herself constantly glancing at Garrett. He hadn't said another word, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something much darker than simple abandonment. That night, the tribal council would meet. Her future, her very life, would be decided. Entangled up in all of it were her growing feelings for the silent, powerful warrior who rode beside her. His presence, a constant, reassuring weight. He hadn't let go of her arm for the first hour of the ride back, his thumb stroking the back of her hand in a gesture so possessive and tender, it made her heart ache. She had survived. She had faced her demons and chosen mercy over vengeance. She had proven herself. But as she looked at the back of Thomas Garrett's head, a terrifying thought began to take root in her mind. What if the real test hadn't even begun? The moon was a perfect silver dollar hanging in an ink-black sky. The great council fire roared in the center of the camp, spitting sparks up toward the stars. The entire village was gathered, their faces painted with flickering light and shadow. Elena sat on a buffalo hide, sandwiched between Ayana's reassuring presence and the stoic figure of Chief Quanah, Kay's father. Her heart was a trapped bird, beating frantically against her ribs. This was it, the moment of judgment. The rescued captives had been fed and their wounds tended to. They were kept under guard at the edge of the camp, a strange collection of ghosts from her past life. Thomas Garrett, delirious with pain and fever, was being cared for by the tribe's medicine man. An act of mercy that seemed almost impossible to Elena, a testament to the honor of these people. Across the fire, Kay sat with the other warriors. He hadn't spoken to her since their return, but his eyes were a constant presence. They met hers through the dancing flames, and in their green depths she saw a storm of pride, anxiety, and something else. Something so fierce and possessive it made her skin tingle. Chief Quanah stood, his powerful frame commanding absolute silence. "We gather tonight," he began, his voice deep and resonant, "to judge the white woman, Elena Morrison. She has lived among us. She has learned our ways, and today she risked her own life to save those who had betrayed her." He paused, his wise old eyes sweeping over the assembled faces. "The council will now decide. Is her spirit true? Is she worthy of becoming one of the people?" An ancient elder, his face a roadmap of 100 battles, spoke first. "I have seen 80 winters," he said, his voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "Many white captives have come to this camp. They weep, they beg, they plot their escape. This woman is different." He gestured a gnarled hand towards Elena. "She works. She does not complain. She shows respect, and today she chose honor over vengeance. That is a Comanche heart, no matter the color of the skin. A murmur of agreement went through the crowd, but it wasn't unanimous. A young, hot-headed warrior named Mappy jumped to his feet. His face was a mask of anger. "Honored grandfather, your wisdom is great," he said, his voice dripping with barely concealed contempt. "But she is white. Have you forgotten the soldiers who burn our villages, the settlers who steal our land and kill our buffalo? Her people are our enemies. To accept her is to welcome a snake into our home." Other voices joined his, a chorus of dissent fueled by generations of pain and mistrust. Elena's blood ran cold. This was what she had feared, that her actions wouldn't matter, that she would only ever be judged by the color of her skin. Then a figure rose that silenced the entire camp. Takakota, the scarred warrior. The man who had lost 3 sons to white soldiers. The man who had looked at her with nothing but hatred in his eyes. He stood tall, his gaze fixed on the fire. "I speak as a man who has lost everything to the white man," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble of pain. "No one in this circle has more reason to hate her race than I do." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over them. Then he turned his head and looked directly at Elena. His dark eyes were unreadable. "And I say this woman is worthy." A collective gasp went through the crowd. If Takakota, the most vocal of her detractors, was speaking for her, then the world had truly been turned on its head. "She could have stayed here today, safe," Takakota continued, his voice gaining power. "She could have let the Apache have their justice, a justice many of us would have applauded. Instead, she chose to ride. She offered herself as bait. She faced death for people who deserved none of her courage." He swept his arm out, indicating the entire council. "We speak of the Comanche spirit. Today I saw it, and it was in her." Chayton, the young warrior who had devised the dangerous plan, stood next. "She rides like us," he said simply. "She thinks like us. She has the heart of a warrior. To judge her by her blood is to diminish ourselves." One by one they spoke. Some still argued against her, their fear and hatred a powerful poison. But the tide had turned. Her actions, her impossible choice, had spoken louder than their prejudice. Finally, Chief Quanah raised his hand for silence. "The council has spoken, but there is one voice we have not heard." His eyes found his son. "Kay, you brought her to us. You led the mission that tested her. What say you now?" The firelight danced across Kay's face as he rose. He seemed to draw all the light and air in the circle to himself. He was magnificent. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it commanded the attention of every soul present. "I brought Elena Morrison to this camp because when I found her by the creek, I saw a fire in her spirit that had not been extinguished by the desert," he began, his eyes locked on hers. "I have watched her. I have seen her kindness to our children. I have seen her respect for our elders. And today I saw a courage that would shame many warriors." He paused, and Elena could see a battle being waged within him. "But there is more. Something the council must know before you decide." The silence in the camp was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. "I love her," Kay said. The words, spoken so simply, so plainly, exploded in the quiet like a thunderclap. Elena felt the air leave her lungs. A dizzying, roaring sound filled her ears. He had said it, in front of his father, in front of his entire tribe. "I love Elena Morrison," he repeated, his voice stronger now, filled with a certainty that defied any opposition. "She has become as necessary to me as the air I breathe. She is the other half of my soul." He turned from the council to face his father directly. "Because of this, my heart is not impartial. I cannot judge her fairly, but I can say this." His voice rang out with unshakable conviction. "If this council chooses to reject her, I will respect your decision, but I will not live by it. I will leave the people. I will walk away from my life here, because a life without her is no life at all." The shocked silence was shattered by a sound no one expected. Chief Quanah threw back his head and laughed, a deep, booming laugh that echoed through the camp. "My son," he roared, shaking his head. "Always the dramatic one. You wait until the judgment of a woman to declare both your love and your intention to abandon your people." The chief's laughter died down, and his expression became serious once more. "But," he said, his voice dropping, "we all know you do not speak such words lightly. For years you have been a stone, a warrior, and nothing more. If this white woman has managed to melt that stone, then she must be a fire unlike any we have ever seen." He turned his gaze to Elena, his eyes sharp and penetrating. "The council will now deliberate." As the elders gathered to make their final decision, a new, terrifying thought wormed its way into Elena's mind. Kay had just put everything on the line for her, his position, his family, his entire world. He had chained his fate to hers. But what if he had chained himself to a lie? Her mind flashed back to Garrett, to the strange look in his eyes, the feeling of wrongness she couldn't shake. She had forgiven him for abandoning her. But what if he'd done something worse? Something unforgivable? What if by saving him, she had brought a poison back to this camp? A poison that would not only destroy her, but the man who had just sacrificed everything for her. The council members were filing back to their seats around the fire. Chief Quana stood before them, his face unreadable. The moment had come, but Elena was no longer thinking about whether they would accept her. She was thinking about the sick, heavy secret she suspected Thomas Garrett was still hiding, and she realized with a lurch of pure terror that her trial wasn't over. It had just entered a new and far more dangerous phase. As Chief Quana prepared to speak, Elena felt a sudden, urgent need to know the truth. It was a compulsion, a premonition so strong it made her shiver. She had to know what Garrett was hiding before this went any further. "May I speak?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly as she got to her feet. The chief nodded, granting her permission. "Before you render your judgment," she said, her voice growing stronger, "I have a question, not for the council, but for one of the survivors." Her eyes scanned the edge of the camp where the captives were huddled. "I wish to speak to Thomas Garrett." A murmur of confusion rippled through the camp. Kay shot her a questioning look, his brow furrowed. What was she doing? Two warriors brought Garrett forward. He was weak, barely able to stand, his face a mask of pain. They held him up before the council fire. "Mr. Garrett," Elena began, her voice ringing with a newfound authority, "in the valley you apologized to me. You said my father was a good man." "He was," Garrett croaked, his eyes darting around nervously. "A brave man." "He was also a meticulous man," Elena said, taking a step closer. "He kept a journal. Every day he wrote in it, about our journey, the people, the challenges we faced. He wrote about you, Mr. Garrett. He wrote that he suspected you were shorting people on their rations, that you were making deals for supplies and pocketing the profits." Garrett's face went pale beneath the bruises. "That's a lie. The man was delirious." "Was he delirious when he confronted you about it, the day before the axle on our wagon accidentally broke?" Elena pressed, her voice like ice. The pieces were clicking into place in her mind, forming a picture of pure evil. "He told you he would expose you to the whole wagon train when we reached the next fort. But he never got the chance, did he?" Garrett began to tremble. "I don't know what you're talking about." "My father's death was ruled an accident." Elena's voice rose, filled with a righteous fury she didn't know she possessed. "A runaway horse. But you were the one holding the reins, weren't you, Mr. Garrett? You were the one who let it go. You were the one who aimed it right at him." "No!" Garrett shrieked, his eyes wild with terror. "It's not true." "And my wagon," Elena continued relentlessly. "That axle didn't just break. It was sawed, wasn't it? Weakened just enough so that the next big bump would snap it. You needed to shut me up, to get rid of the one person who knew about your threat to my father." The camp was in an uproar. Kay was on his feet, his face a thundercloud of disbelief and rage. "She's lying!" Garrett screamed, looking desperately at the Comanche faces around him. "She's a witch! She conspired with you people to attack us. It was all her plan." But it was too late. The truth was written all over his face. Martha Holbrook, who had been watching from the sidelines with a horrified expression, let out a sob. "He's telling the truth," she cried, stumbling forward. "About Elena's father. I saw it. I saw Garrett arguing with him. I saw the look on his face, and the axle. He was working on it the night before it broke. He said he was reinforcing it. She pulled a small, leather-bound book from inside her tattered dress. I found this in the wreckage of their wagon. It's her father's journal. I kept it hidden. She handed the journal to Chief Quanah. The chief couldn't read the English words, but he could read the language of human evil. He looked from the book to the pathetic, blubbering man before him. Elena felt a cold, clean wave of clarity wash over her. She had been so focused on forgiving Garrett for leaving her to die, she had never even considered the real truth. He hadn't just abandoned her. He had murdered her father. He had tried to murder her. She had saved the man who had destroyed her entire world. The irony was so bitter, so profound, it almost made her laugh. Kay moved to her side, his presence a solid wall of heat and fury. He placed a hand on her back, a silent message of support. He looked at Garrett with a loathing so pure it was terrifying. The game had changed. This was no longer about Elena's worthiness. It was about justice, a justice that was now in the hands of the Comanche. Chief Quanah closed the journal. His face was grim. He looked at Elena, then at his son, then at the cowering murderer. "The council's decision is postponed," he declared, his voice booming through the stunned silence. "First, we will deal with this." He pointed a finger at Garrett. "This man's fate is no longer his own. It belongs to the woman he wronged." All eyes turned to Elena. The entire camp, warriors, elders, women, children, waited. The power of life and death, the power Key had spoken of, was now truly in her hands. She could ask for Garrett's immediate execution. No one would deny her. They would hand her the knife themselves. Vengeance was hers for the taking. The perfect, righteous, bloody revenge for her father's murder. She looked at Garrett, weeping and pathetic on the ground. She thought of her father's kind face, his gentle hands, his unwavering belief in doing the right thing. What would he want her to do? She took a deep breath, the smell of wood smoke and justice filling her lungs. She had ridden into Apache territory to save this man's life, not knowing the full extent of his evil, and now she had to make one final choice, not to prove her worth to the Comanche, but to prove her worth to herself and to the memory of her father. "He is not a warrior," Elena said, her voice clear and steady, ringing out across the silent camp. "To kill him like this gives him an honor he does not deserve." She looked directly at Chief Quanah. "His crimes were against my people. He should be judged by their laws." A wave of confusion swept the crowd. They didn't understand. "There is a fort 2 days' ride from here," she continued. "Fort Griffin. Take him there. Hand him over to the soldiers. Tell them what he did. Let him hang from a white man's gallows. Let his own people see his cowardice and greed for what it is." It was a judgment none of them had expected. It was not the swift, clean vengeance of the Comanche. It was something else. A cold, calculated justice. A justice that required patience and a trust in a system that had often failed them. Kay looked at her, and the burning rage in his eyes was replaced by a look of profound awe. He had tested her, asking if she could rise above her desire for revenge. But he had never imagined this. She hadn't just risen above it, she had redefined it. Chief Quanah stared at her for a long moment, his ancient eyes seeming to see into her very soul. Then he nodded slowly. "It will be as you say," he declared. "His fate is sealed." He turned to the rest of the council. "And so is hers." He faced the camp. "The council does not need to deliberate. We have seen all we need to see. This woman, Elena Morrison, has a spirit of iron and a heart of true honor. She has taught us that justice is not always about the spilling of blood." He walked towards Elena, his hand raised. "From this night forward, you are no longer Elena Morrison, the outsider. You are one of us. You are a daughter of the people." He placed his hand on her shoulder. "And we will give you a new name. You will be called Aina Hin, the brave spirit." A roar of approval erupted from the camp. Cheers and shouts echoed into the night. Aina ran to her, tears streaming down her face, and hugged her tightly. Warriors who had once glared at her with suspicion now nodded their heads in respect. Takakota, the scarred warrior, met her eyes across the fire and gave her a slow, deliberate bow of his head. He had lost his sons to white men, but he could recognize a true warrior's spirit. no matter where he found it. In the midst of the celebration, Kay came to her. He took her hands in his touch gentle but firm. The chaos of the camp seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them in the flickering firelight. "I was wrong," he said, his voice low and thick with emotion. "I thought I was testing you, but it was you who was testing us, testing me." "I love you, Kay," she whispered, the words she had longed to say finally breaking free. "Ayana Hin," he said, tasting her new name on his lips. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "I asked the spirits for a sign. I had a vision of a woman with hair like the sun who would save my people from a great darkness. I thought it was a prophecy about war. I thought you were a weapon, but I was a fool." His green eyes, so full of warmth and love, held hers. "You did not save us from darkness. You brought us into the light." He lowered his head and kissed her. It was a kiss that sealed a promise, a kiss that joined two worlds, a kiss that began a legend. The celebration raged on around them, a joyous symphony of drums and song. The frightened girl who had been abandoned in the desert was gone forever. In her place stood Ayanahin, the brave spirit of the Comanche, and as her husband, the future chief of his people, held her in his arms, she knew, with every fiber of her being, that she was finally, truly home. The years that followed were like a story sung by the elders. Ayanahin and Kay became a legend among the Plains tribes. Their love was as strong and enduring as the land itself. Thomas Garrett was delivered to Fort Griffin, and true to Elena's prediction, he was tried and hanged, his story becoming a cautionary tale for greedy men. Ayana Hin never fully forgot the world she came from, but her life was now with the people. She bore Kay two strong sons with his fierce green eyes, and a daughter with her hair of spun gold. She learned the ways of the medicine women, her hands becoming as skilled at healing as they were with a rifle. She rode beside her husband, not behind him, a true partner in leadership and in life. She helped bridge the gap between their two worlds, earning the respect of even the white soldiers and settlers through her wisdom and unwavering honor. She had faced the worst of humanity in both her own people and her enemies, and had chosen a path of strength and integrity. She had been tested by fire, and emerged not burned, but forged into something stronger and more beautiful than before. The girl who lost everything in the desert found everything under the vast open sky of the plains. Her life became a testament to the idea that sometimes the most brutal endings are just the beginning of the most beautiful stories. So let me ask you a question that's been bothering me since I first heard this story. When Elena, now Ayana Hin, made her choice about Thomas Garrett, was it truly about justice, or was it the ultimate act of revenge? By denying him a quick warrior's death and sending him back to face the shame of his own people, did she hand him a fate worse than anything the Comanche could have devised? I've gone back and forth on this, and I honestly don't know the answer. And what about Kay? He risked a civil war within his own tribe, all based on a feeling he had about a stranger he found in the desert. Was it noble, a leader following his heart and instincts? Or was it reckless, putting his entire nation at risk for a woman he barely knew? Think about it. If Elena had been a different person, his gamble could have destroyed them all. The more you dig into this, the more complicated it gets. Every character was walking a razor's edge between honor and destruction. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because your perspective on these choices really helps me find the next story to tell. Elena's journey shows that our greatest tragedies can sometimes be doorways to our true destiny. But was it fate that led her to Kay? Or did she just make a series of brave choices in the face of impossible circumstances? If you believe her story is one of destiny, hit that like button. If you think it's a story about the power of free will, let me know why. And if you were captivated by this incredible story of betrayal, survival, and love against all odds, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. We're building a community here of people who love deep, twisted stories just like this one. Your support means I can keep digging, keep finding these hidden legends, and keep bringing them to you. Thanks for watching. Now go on, get to commenting. I want to know what you think.